Hello, everyone. I am Manuel RAPNOUIL. I'm the head of the Paris office of the European Council on Foreign Relations, which is a pan-European think tank on foreign policy. But it's my pleasure today to be here to chair the panel with our guests, which I'm calling to take a seat. This panel will be dedicated to crafting peace in the cyberspace, and we'll have Brad Smith, who is the president of Microsoft. He's been very active with Microsoft on his digital peace campaign, and he'll speak about that. I'll ask Jean-Yves Le Drian also to join us. You should please all take a seat and join us together. Jean-Yves Le Drian is the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of the French government. He's been also quite active on digital issues. The French Home Affairs released recently a digital strategy, has worked quite intensively on manipulation on information. And this morning there was the Paris call, which was released, and he'll speak to us about that. I have also Marina, who is the chair of the Global Commission on Stability in the Cyberspace, which is an apolitical civil society organization promoting norms for the cyberspace, for the stability of the cyberspace. We have Olaf KOLKMAN, who is the Chief Internet Technology Officer of the Internet Society. He's also a commissioner at the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, but he's here as a representative of the technical community, because if you pay attention, we have a representative of the business, of governments, of civil society, the technical community, and Fabrizio HOCHSCHILD is the UN Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination, and of course he's there as a representative of the UN and international organizations which also play a role in the governance of the cyberspace. Why are we here today? The Paris Peace Forum is here also because of the commemoration of the end of World War I. And one thing that I knew the facts, but I realized what they meant, is that actually the violence didn't really end on November 11. It lasted quite a few more months, and even in some places it lasted until the next year or even further than that. So that means that already a century ago, the distinction between war and peace was blurred, was not so clear. Well, that's even more the case today, and that's true in the real world, but that maybe is true also even more in the cyberspace. And the cyberspace is less and less just the virtual world and more part of our real world too. So, as we know, efforts for peace, to promote peace, may fail, but war reminds us of why they're worth a try, and there are two ways to do these efforts. The first is to suppress war through law, through deterrence, through collective security. And the other way is to put rules in war, to prohibit specific weapons, to protect civilians, etc. So how do we craft peace in the cyberspace? Is that the same thing? Do we apply the same rules? Do we need new rules? Do we need new institutions? This is going to be the topic today. And we'll begin by Brad Smith because, as I said, Microsoft has been very active. Microsoft is actually active on several fronts, so I think these efforts amount to a digital peace campaign, and he'll tell us a bit about that.
Well, good morning. Thank you. It's an honor to be with everyone here this morning and to be with all of you in the audience. We do believe that this is a time where the world needs to recognize the importance of digital peace, that we need to have a real movement to address these issues. We need it because the threats from cyber weapons have grown. We can easily look back at the last year, for example, at the WannaCry attack and the NotPetya attack. We see that 2017 was a year where there were almost 1 billion people around the world that were victims of cyber attacks. And we need to recognize that these are not just machines attacking machines. When we depend on the internet and this information infrastructure for the operation of our hospitals, for the heating of our homes, for the delivery of food, all of our lives depend on this. And perhaps we depend on it as much as anywhere else in the context of the electoral processes for our democracies. So we believe we do need a movement that encourages people to come together, that builds on a multi-stakeholder approach, that hears the voices of people around the world, and perhaps above all else, that can support the leadership of governments like the leadership of the French government that we are seeing today and this week. I think that's why the French government's publication this morning was so important. We're proud to be a signatory and a supporter of the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace. And I think it is precisely that kind of effort that the world is going to need more of in the years ahead.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Minister Le Drian, who will say a bit more about the Paris call and about the French vision. I think Microsoft has been quite active on a number of issues, and we'll get back to you, Brad, so that you explain the various dimensions of this peace campaign. But maybe Minister Le Drian can tell us about the French vision of how to address this issue of peace in the cyberspace. And he'll speak in French, so if you want to put your helmet, if you need that, that's the moment.
Merci à Brad Smith pour son introduction. Je voudrais rappeler que la question de la sécurité et de la stabilité du cyberespace est devenue un enjeu majeur. Certes, la révolution numérique nous a permis des opportunités formidables au niveau économique, au niveau relationnel, au niveau sociétal, mais elle a aussi une face sombre. Aujourd'hui, plus un jour ne se passe sans que l'on ne découvre une nouvelle campagne malveillante dans le cyberespace ou une nouvelle attaque informatique menée à des fins d'espionnage, de sabotage ou d'influence. Et ces menaces constituent désormais pour les États et pour nos sociétés un défi sans précédent qui appelle des réactions audacieuses et novatrices. Et pour faire du cyberespace un espace à la fois ouvert et sûr, nous devons nous employer à repenser nos pratiques. Et en la matière, les seules solutions vraiment efficaces sont des solutions collectives, d'où l'appel de Paris pour la confiance et la sécurité dans le cyberespace qui a été rendu public et sera repris cet après-midi au forum à l'UNESCO par le président de la République. Mais déjà, les soutiens sont significatifs puisqu'il y a 51 États qui ont soutenu, 93 acteurs de la société civile et 218 partenaires du secteur privé. Donc ça montre que rechercher la paix digitale, gagner la paix digitale est un objectif que beaucoup d'acteurs partagent et c'est tout à fait opportun que cela se déroule dans le cadre du Forum de Paris. Et je voudrais livrer quelques éléments d'analyse et faire quelques propositions complémentaires. D'abord, je voudrais souligner la légitimité des États à intervenir pour assurer la paix et la sécurité internationale dans ce domaine. La responsabilité des États, la légitimité des États ne s'arrête pas aux portes du cyberespace. Et la France, avec plusieurs partenaires étatiques, a fait du renforcement de la stabilité du cyberespace l'une de ses priorités et nous œuvrons à la prévention des crises cyber. Nous le faisons à différents niveaux. Nous le faisons au niveau national, tout d'abord en faisant preuve de transparence sur notre modèle de gouvernance des enjeux cyber, sur notre interprétation du droit international dans le cyberespace et sur les canaux que nous voulons développer avec nos partenaires. Nous agissons aussi au niveau régional, via l'Union européenne, via aussi l'OTAN et aussi dans les groupes comme le G7, le G20, le SCE, où nous cherchons à développer des mesures permettant de renforcer la confiance entre les membres des organisations. Il s'agit de créer des mécanismes permettant d'échanger et surtout de prévenir les crises, permettant surtout de renforcer le niveau global de résilience, car on sait que la sécurité du système est équivalente à la sécurité du maillon le plus faible, et d'où la nécessité de renforcer les mécanismes d'information, de confiance et de résilience, et nous sommes très actifs dans ce domaine, en particulier bientôt dans le cadre du G20, mais déjà au sein de l'OSCE, c'est de manière significative. Cela nous a amené aussi à intervenir au sein de l'OTAN pour renforcer cette transparence. Puis au niveau international, nous travaillons à poser les bases d'une régulation internationale du cyberespace fondée sur le droit international existant pour qu'il y ait un développement de normes de comportement responsable et le respect des libertés fondamentales et des droits de l'homme. Et les négociations menées sur ces sujets dans le cadre des Nations Unies ont permis déjà des avancées au cours de ces dernières années, mais nous espérons ces négociations reprendre l'année prochaine et la France y prendra toute sa part. Plus généralement, les travaux dans le champ nouveau de la cyberdiplomatie ont permis de faire émerger certaines normes de bonne conduite applicables au comportement des États dans le cyberespace. Mais certains enjeux spécifiques n'ont pas été encore suffisamment traités et mériteraient, selon nous, d'être développés. Je cite d'abord la lutte contre la prolifération et la commercialisation d'outils, de logiciels ou de techniques malveillants dans le cyberespace. Cela doit devenir une priorité et les États doivent s'engager pour le contrôle de leur exportation des outils et techniques offensifs cyber, tout en prenant en compte les intérêts légitimes des entreprises de cybersécurité et du monde académique. Ça, c'est le premier point. Deuxièmement, nous devons également veiller à interdire ou encadrer certaines pratiques particulièrement déstabilisatrices. Je pense en particulier au hackback, qui consiste pour un acteur privé à s'arroger le droit de mener une contre-attaque dans le cyberespace dans une espèce de légitime défense privée. Et je voudrais redire ici l'importance de l'exercice de la contrainte légitime qui doit rester le monopole des États, puisque c'est la responsabilité des États que d'assurer le respect du droit et éventuellement le faire par la force. Enfin, nous devons agir pour nous protéger contre les risques de déstabilisation des processus démocratiques ou électoraux et éviter en la matière toute ingérence extérieure et renforcer les bonnes pratiques en matière cyber de tous nos citoyens ou encore nous assurer qu'aucun acteur ne puisse remettre en cause l'intégrité et l'accessibilité d'Internet. Voilà des propositions qui sont reprises dans l'appel pour la confiance et la sécurité dans le cyberespace que vous mentionniez tout à l'heure. Et s'il est légitime et souhaitable que les États interviennent pour assurer la sécurité de l'espace numérique, je voudrais dire aussi que les acteurs privés, le monde de la recherche, les organisations non gouvernementales ont un rôle majeur à jouer, comme le montre d'abord la composition de notre panel, et puis les initiatives qui ont fait avancer la réflexion sur ce sujet essentiel. Je pense notamment à la Commission globale pour la stabilité du cyberespace, représentée par Madame KALJURAND, dont les travaux ont déjà livré des pistes importantes. Je pense à la Charter of Trust de Siemens et d'autres grandes entreprises qui s'engagent autour de principes simples de responsabilité et de sécurité. Je pense enfin au Cybersecurity Tech Accord proposé par Microsoft et qui rassemble désormais plusieurs entreprises signataires. Il est essentiel pour les États que nous puissions compter sur l'implication des entreprises privées, parce que lorsque des produits ou des services numériques restent sur le marché alors qu'ils contiennent des vulnérabilités, le risque de voir des attaques informatiques se produire augmente. Et bien sûr, en cas d'utilisation massive de ces produits et de ces services, le risque prend alors une dimension systémique. Et j'ajoute que le développement du secteur des objets connectés, qui accentue la complexité et l'interdépendance des écosystèmes, rend cette question encore plus pressante. Il est donc nécessaire de poser au niveau international un principe de responsabilité des acteurs privés en matière de sécurité numérique dans la conception et dans la maintenance de leurs produits et services. J'ai déjà eu cet échange avec Brad Smith à New York il y a peu de temps. D'ici la fin de l'année, la France fera des propositions qui conforteront ces orientations dans la mouvance de l'appel de Paris, d'abord pour renforcer les obligations et la transparence des acteurs privés sur la durée de maintien en conditions de sécurité de leurs produits ou services numériques, et aussi pour améliorer les processus de gestion et de divulgation responsable des vulnérabilités, qui est un autre sujet qui est tout à fait essentiel. Et donc il importe que nous soyons ensemble dans la co-responsabilité de la sécurisation et dans le partage bien identifié des responsabilités. Je pense que cette préoccupation est largement partagée, ce qui explique le succès rapide de l'appel de Paris dont nous avons parlé en début de panel et qui rencontre maintenant un succès qui va, je pense, donner de l'exemplarité, de la pression, de la mobilisation pour aboutir à des normes et au renforcement de la sécurité des process numériques. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Perhaps maybe because you were so disciplined in the introduction, in the use of your time, and since the Minister mentioned a few of your initiatives, I saw a video of you at the Web Summit where you mentioned today what is happening right now as a very important moment. Can you tell us why this call is important and how that works with the efforts that Microsoft has been doing, this peace campaign?
Absolutely. I think that the Digital Peace Campaign starts with a recognition of the challenges that we're facing in the world today, but what it's fundamentally focused on is action that can and needs to be taken. And that action really falls into several categories. One is certainly a recognition of the need for strong global norms and ultimately rules that will govern the use of cyber weapons by governments themselves. And so our peace campaign seeks to build on the important work that others have been doing, like the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, norms that have really been advanced for a number of years, norms that in some cases are actually reflected in international instruments like the United Nations Charter and the Fourth Geneva Convention already. But we need to move these norms forward. And I think the key to moving them forward in the first instance calls for governments to come together. And that's what the Paris Call does. As you heard, to bring together 51 governments from around the world so far, and undoubtedly growing, is an important step. But I think the Paris Call is also important because of the principles that are reflected in it. There's a principle that really, as you saw when it was published this morning, calls on governments and indeed all of us to work together to prevent and respond to significant or systemic or indiscriminate attacks against civilians, against citizens, against civilian infrastructure. And when you think about the lesson learned in the last century in the Geneva Convention, the need to protect civilians in times of war, the Paris Call really calls on all of us to protect civilians in what is supposed to be a time of peace.
Can I just interrupt you so that everyone in the audience understands what you mean by cyber attacks who impact civilians? Can you give us one or two examples?
Well, think about the WannaCry attack last year and just step back and think about what it means in the context of human history and the history of warfare. This was an attack that the world has now recognized was launched by a group associated with North Korea. It was launched on a Friday morning in Western Europe, the 12th of May. It first affected the telecommunications in Spain. Very quickly, it spread across the United Kingdom. 1/3 of the hospitals in the National Health Service had to stop working. There were 19,000 people going for medical care on that day alone that were not able to get the care they needed. But the attack didn't stop there. It literally spread west, almost with the rising sun around the world. And in a single 24-hour period, it impacted 150 countries. Imagine what it means to live in a world where one weapon launched by one country can impact 150 nations in a day. Or to think about the NotPetya attack in Ukraine, launched on the 26th of June. Over 1/3 of the computers in that country stopped working. People couldn't get money out of automated teller machines because the ATMs stopped working. People couldn't watch the news because the news broadcasters' computers stopped working. People couldn't go get medical care. People couldn't buy things because their credit cards stopped working. It disrupted society in a very broad way. So this is where we begin to get a glimpse of how dangerous these cyber weapons are. And so, to have the Paris Call focus on indiscriminate and systemic attacks is of great importance. But there's a second principle, and several, that I would call out as well. And this is where, in some ways, the Paris Call breaks new ground. At least it's one of the first instruments to really address this. And that is the importance of protecting our electoral processes, protecting democracy. We saw, as we eventually learned in the United States in 2016, that candidates were being hacked, that email was being weaponized. In 2017, we at Microsoft, through our Threat Intelligence Center, saw attempted attacks on all of the candidates seeking the presidency of the Republic of France. And we've since seen further threats to voting systems. We've seen very sophisticated and intentional spreading of disinformation. And so we fundamentally live at a time when technology is being used to attack the democracies of the world. And the democracies of the world need to unite and stand up for what is needed. But we also need to recognize that it requires action by more than governments alone. It requires this multi-stakeholder approach. What last century was multilateralism is this century not only multilateralism, but multi-stakeholderism. That's what the Paris Call reflects, and it builds on other industry and civil society movements to advance all of this.
And so I think we're really right now at the center of the discussion. We've mentioned monopoly of force. We have mentioned the applicability of existing norms or not, the role of states, the role of other stakeholders. This multi-stakeholder governance, Marina, KALJURAND, it's also about having civil society. And your organization is one representative of the civil society. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do? And I was curious, we discussed that in the briefing room, I was curious why the Commission is called the Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. How is that different from peace in the cyberspace? Or is that not different?
Thank you, Manuel. Well, as a former diplomat, before I answer a question, I say what I want to say, yeah? but
Sounds fair.
But first of all, like others, I'd like to say how honored I am to be in this panel. And really, I'd like to recognize France for this call, because it's symbolic. We're doing it on the 100th anniversary of World War I. It's very important because it looks into future, and you did a great job in getting so much support. And I'm really proud that my commission is among 93 civil society representatives to be early supporters of the Paris Call. And I'm happy to bring some gender balance to this discussion.
So are we.
Yes, the Commission, the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, you can follow us, cyberstability.org, and we have a stand in the lobby of this conference, is a multi-stakeholder model. And I would say that it also serves as an example how multi-stakeholder model works in real life. Because we are used to writing about in our political documents, in our strategic documents, we might call it inclusiveness, we might call it consultations mechanisms, but let's be honest, governments so far are not used to cooperating with private sector, with other stakeholders. And I say it as a former foreign minister, although formers can say whatever they want, but still, as a former Estonian foreign minister, I saw it, how important is multi-stakeholder model and cooperation with other stakeholders. So the Commission, it's geographically wide, from Berkeley to Beijing, from Tallinn to Johannesburg. It has hackers, it has professors, it has IT people. We are proud to have Olaf with us.
We have a separate category altogether.
We are happy to have industry, and Microsoft is also represented in our commission. So it's an apolitical organization that works from bottom up. We are looking at what are the main problems. We are trying to propose the ways of addressing those problems. We're trying to propose norms of responsible state behavior. From there, we move to principles. What are the governing principles in cyberspace to make it stable, peaceful, secure, whatever word we use? And here I think we have a very good overlap with United Nations, and I'm really happy that Fabrizio will talk about the high-level panel. And finally, our commission will propose in a year or two a future structure of cooperation in cyberspace. Why stability? I think that academia can write books. What is the right word? Stability, security, peace. For us, it's the state where all consumers feel that they can take advantage of the services, where we feel and know that the internet is free, open, affordable, accessible, resilient, and so on, and so on, and so on. I understand some people go crazy when we say cybersecurity. Happy to discuss digital stability. So I don't think that the term or definition is the key. The key is what we see behind that. And there we see stability for everybody. People, consumers, organizations, states, to behave and be part of cyberspace.
Thank you very much. Olaf, you just said that there is a different category, which is the technical community. Can you explain a bit more why is that a specific perspective in that multi-stakeholder? The name is a bit complex, but actually your case is a very good explanation of why we need different partners to cover the whole spectrum of this peace issue in cyberspace.
Yeah, I think the long and the short of it is that creating cyber security and stability is not the work of just a few actors. It's not the work of just a few states and a few Silicon Valley companies, but it's the work of millions of security professionals that work all across the world to protect our digital assets, to operate the networks on which the internet runs. There are 60,000 networks connecting to each other that make the internet the internet. And all that infrastructure is secured through technical standardization, through collaboration, not cooperation, but collaboration. Collaboration is working together in a networked way and towards a shared vision. And I think it's incredibly important that the knowledge of how all these security mechanisms work, how the internet itself works, how computer systems work, is a significant part of the discussion itself. Because without that knowledge, some decisions that might be taken by groups that come together, say in a multilateral fashion, might actually break the abilities and the promises that all this technology offers us.
One of the things that I know the Internet Society insists on is the difference between regulating the infrastructure and regulating what is happening on the web. Can you be a bit more specific about why that is so important from your perspective?
So the Internet, the way that I look at the Internet, this is going to be a little bit of a lecture, sorry for that. The way that I look at the Internet is like a model of an hourglass. At the bottom of the hourglass, you have the networks, the 60,000 plus networks that I just talked about. They talk to each other, and essentially, on the top of the hourglass, you have the application providers. The web is one big application with all these actors in it that connect to the Internet at one side, to one of the networks, and we all connect to other places in the network, and we can interoperate. We can bring traffic together. The fact that the lower layer of that hourglass does not necessarily know what is happening on the upper layer of the hourglass, but there is a mutual expectation of a set of protocols and standards, technical standards. That is what makes the internet work, and which brings permissionless innovations and the fact to globally connect. Those are two incredibly important properties to the internet, because permissionless innovations makes you can invent the uninvented. A few years ago, when we sat here, we would have talked about blockchains in these type of fora. But blockchain is an invention that is possible because the network allows for these type of inventions to work. So I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, but what is then important is if you talk about solutions, for instance, about content in social networks, which might bring instability to society. Make sure that you take the measures at the right layer so you don't break the internet. That is one of the concerns that we have when we look at the system as a whole.
Fabrizio HOCHSCHILD, you're a representative of the UN. We've discussed how the internet is creating need for new institutions, new models of governance, new formats, etc. What is the role that the UN is playing in that context, and how do you see the UN as one of these stakeholders, or maybe as a facilitator of bringing the stakeholders together?
D'abord, si vous me permettez, j'aimerais bien aussi féliciter la France pour cette initiative. Et je dois aussi dire que ce jour, c'était vraiment une signification spéciale pour moi. Mon grand-père, de côté de mon père, a battu dans la Première Guerre mondiale de côté des Allemands. Et mon grand-père de partie maternelle, un Écossais, a battu de côté les Anglais. Bon, il faut dire qu'avant de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, mon grand-père allemand, qui était juif, a perdu son nationalité allemande. Pour ça, aujourd'hui, moi, je suis chilien. Mais the Second World War was also significant because it introduced a whole new dimension of warfare. Sea warfare, war on land were known for a very long time in human history. The Second World War, and ever since, have made the new dimension, air warfare, absolutely decisive in most areas of combat. I think what we're witnessing today is a fourth dimension of warfare, and that is cyber warfare. And like the introduction of air warfare, it calls for totally different approaches to what we know of war hitherto. I think the issue of cyber attacks has been well highlighted by Microsoft, and I think we have to congratulate Microsoft and, of course, France for taking that issue so vigorously. And I think there are a few important illustrations there. Both the WannaCry and NetPetya attacks, the fallout that Brad Smith described, was reckless collateral damage. The damage described, except for in Ukraine, was not actually what was targeted. But given the connectivity of the net that we heard from Olaf, today any attack, digital attack, nobody knows quite where it will end because nobody has a full overview of that connectivity, and that makes it particularly dangerous. And the notion of collateral damage, of civilian damage, takes on a whole new dimension. But I think it's very important to put this in a more comprehensive picture of the threats. And the sort of cybersecurity threats that have been so well highlighted, I think have to be seen in the context of the broader digital threats of the digital era. One is the use of social media to create the conditions which allow for conflict. I mean, there's an old saying, the first victim of conflict is the truth. And one could argue the first victim of social media is also the truth. We've seen, for example, in Myanmar, that the use of smartphones coincided with a massive increase in inter-ethnic violence. We've seen in Libya that warlords no longer gather their followers on the street, but they do it via social media from the comfort of their homes. So I think we also need to look at the new emergence of hate speech, the new spread of tribalism through social media, and that's an essential part also of a threat to digital peace. And I don't think we've come to grips to that. And I think we're witnessing that from Myanmar to Europe, to the US, to many other countries. And a third aspect that the Secretary General, my boss, has drawn attention to is the threat of AI and lethal autonomous weapons. Just a week ago, he called for a comprehensive ban on these weapons. These are weapons that can kill without any human agency. And the technology is there, and there are even rumors that some states have made use of that technology, at least developed the systems, even if they've never actually been used. So I think that's a third element that we need to take into account in addressing the challenges. The Secretary General, there are many efforts to do this in the context of the UN. In the first committee, which is the committee which deals with arms issues, security issues, there are expert groups. The member states just agreed to look at these. Many of the Paris principles build on principles that came out of previous expert groups at the UN, and I think there is a healthy track there, although many member states are still hesitant to do anything that goes beyond the non-binding, the voluntary. And clearly, to have accountability, clearly to stop something, we eventually will need something that is more binding. And then, of course, the Secretary General has also brought into being a high-level panel that's looking at how we bring about greater cooperation, greater norm setting, greater public policy, global public policy in the digital sphere. And there, the Secretary General is very conscious that we need a whole new approach. The traditional UN approach that worked, for example, to contain the threat of atomic war, that worked, for example, to stop space being used for massive weapons of mass destruction, that approach of conventions that take 10 years to negotiate is unlikely to work. We need a multi-stakeholder approach, but we also need approaches that are much faster, much more nimble. Because if we work for 10 years on something, even if it's through a multi-stakeholder approach, by the time whatever we work on is ready, the technology it covers will already be yesterday's technology. So we need approaches that can work much faster to address these emerging threats, and of course bring together all the communities involved. And the high-level panel, which we're honored to have Marina on, is looking precisely on what those sort of mechanisms could look like and what should be the principles underlying them. But this is the issue of our age, and there's a certain urgency to coming to grips with it. What I think we want to avoid is a sort of Hiroshima moment, a sort of wake-up call, where we suddenly treat this with the urgency it deserves because something very catastrophic has happened. God forbid that that happens and that we come to our senses soon now. And that's also the call of the Secretary General. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Le Drian, the Paris call is not just about security in the cyberspace, but the title is for trust and security in the cyberspace. I have heard you, or I have read you in interviews insisting on the importance of trust in foreign policy, especially in the current context. Maybe you can tell us why you think that the trust issue is an important factor if we just keep on cyber issues. I know you've been very active on manipulation of information, for instance. I think that has a relation. And maybe the other panelists then will tell us how they think their group of stakeholders can contribute or is looking at the issue of trust in cyberspace and not just security as an immediate absence of violence and attack. Minister Le Drian.
Le plus spectaculaire, ce sont les attaques et les violences. Ils ont été évoqués tout à l'heure par Brad Smith. Et le danger est là, il est permanent, il est extrêmement fort et il est urgent. Et tout à l'heure, il y a un instant, le représentant des Nations Unies indiquait la nécessité d'aller vite. Et si nous n'allons pas vite, nous allons être dépassés par la violence et par les catastrophes qui s'en suivront. Donc, pour ma part, je mets là une priorité forte. Et on sait bien qu'au niveau des Nations Unies, les discussions ont eu lieu, mais qu'elles sont difficiles. Au sein du groupe d'experts qui y contribuent, j'espère qu'elles vont reprendre maintenant. On me dit que oui. Il y a 2 résolutions qui sont en cours de préparation. Elles sont pour l'instant contradictoires, mais il y a besoin de fixer des normes et de faire en sorte que sur la cybersécurité, on agisse de la même manière que celle qui a été utilisée pour se prémunir contre la prolifération nucléaire. Il faut des accords pour éviter la guerre numérique qui serait catastrophique. Et il faut le respect des principes du droit public international par l'ensemble des acteurs. Ces principes s'appliquent aussi au numérique et ils ne sont pas, je le disais dans mon propos tout à l'heure, ils ne s'arrêtent pas à la porte du cyberespace. Ça, c'est le premier point. Le deuxième point, c'est l'identification de la confiance dans les messages et dans la vérité de ce qui circule sur les médias sociaux, en particulier de la vérité de l'information et le fait d'identifier les manipulations en tout genre qui se développent aujourd'hui. Nous avons eu ce matin sur ce sujet un débat avec Reporters sans frontières qui travaille sur cette question pour essayer d'identifier, un peu de la même manière de l'appel de Paris, d'identifier des normes qui permettent de créer la confiance et de combattre la manipulation et la fausse information. Et ce travail est très difficile parce qu'il faut s'assurer du respect du droit à informer, de la liberté d'expression, et en même temps combattre toutes les manipulations qui finalement sont la manière la plus sophistiquée de remettre en cause les droits fondamentaux. Et ce travail-là, il est encore à son balbutiement, même s'il y a une prise de conscience qui se fait. Enfin, dernier point, comme on n'arrive pas à aller aussi vite qu'on le souhaite, et sur le premier sujet et sur le second, il faut se mobiliser pour faire pression, parce que c'est le meilleur moyen d'avancer. Quand on a abouti sur l'accord sur le climat, c'est parce qu'on a créé une nouvelle forme de multilatéralisme qui n'amène pas tout le monde à signer, même certains à se retirer, mais qui met en œuvre une culture partagée qui permet de faire pression et qui permet d'avoir des identifiants reconnaissables pour les uns et pour les autres, qui soient responsables étatiques ou société civile. Il faut agir de la même manière à la fois sur les manipulations et sur les risques d'agression dans la cyberespace. Et c'est le sens de l'appel de Paris qui a été initié ce matin.
Merci. Who else want to comment on that? Brad?
I would just say a couple of things. First, I believe that the Paris call really is based in some ways on a recognition that trust and security are intertwined. When you think about it, you cannot trust technology if it's not protected and if it's not secure. And by the same token, technology that is secure but untrustworthy is going to leave people short of the confidence that they need and deserve to even want to use the technology in the first place. And so we have to advance both of these goals together. It does indeed call for a multi-stakeholder approach, as you mentioned in your question. And I think there is no group that has a higher responsibility than those of us in the tech sector. We create these products, we're responsible for them, we operate much of cyberspace in the form of data centers and undersea cables, and we make the devices that people use. And so I think the Paris call quite appropriately focuses on issues like the security of the supply chain, helping people manage through the life cycle of devices. This is an area where you see the tech sector doing more individually, collectively. As you heard, there's the reference to both our tech sector accord and the Siemens initiative, where the industry is working together in new ways to address these issues, and we're going to need to keep working together in new ways. So I think this multi-stakeholder approach, especially when you look at trust and security together, is a real necessity.
Just because obviously confidence building measures is a normal thing in relations between states, but what you're saying is another illustration of how that has to be a multi-stakeholder, is that the trust issue is not just between states, between governments, but it's also with the other stakeholders, with the public, with the companies, between businesses, etc.
Yeah,
correct?
Absolutely. And I think in the world today, in part because of the changes that technology has brought, in addition to all of the groups that you see reflected here, this is fundamentally about a conversation with the public at large. It is about sharing more information with the public, and it is about ensuring that the voice of the public is heard. That's why the last element of our Digital Peace Initiative, this campaign, is this petition that has now been signed by over 100,000 people in over 130 countries. And I think if we're going to avoid the horrors of the last century, we do need to ensure that people's voices are heard and that people have the information so they can understand and speak out on these kinds of questions.
Okay, don't worry about the time on the screen. We still have a bit more time before we turn to the Q&A. Fabrizio.
I just wanted to say we we have to, the reality is not really with us, at least the member state reality. At the UN in New York, many have said that there hasn't been so much distrust between states since the Cold War. And we see that in the functioning or the lack of functioning, for example, of the Security Council. And I think the rhetoric between some of the superpowers is more hostile than it's been for a very long time. So it's going to be hard. And we saw that His Excellency, the Minister, mentioned that there were 2 resolutions that came out of the first committee. The very fact that there are 2 resolutions is a sign of disagreement among the members. So it's going to be tough. And I think the pressure that the Minister was talked about is so critical. If we think of other progress that's been made recently, the ban on anti-personnel mines, that was a civil society initiative. The convention calling for a ban on nuclear weapons, that was also a civil society initiative. And I think the fact that we have civil society pressure of the type that the Minister called for, together with industry leadership of the type that Brad has shown so in such an exemplary way in recent years, plus the leadership of some states, which, if I can say this, have some of the greatest diplomats working for them, as is the case with France, then I think we can be hopeful, despite the era of distrust in which we live. But it won't be easy, and it will need an effort of everyone in this room and beyond.
Marina, you also wanted to comment on this.
Yes, thank you. I agree very much with what has been said so far on trust, and I think that we can agree that trust is the backbone of cooperation. And you can't import or you can't export trust from above and make it compulsory. I also agree that trust covers all relationships. Governments, citizens, consumers, industry, civil society, government, and so on and so on and so on. And then the question comes, is it doable? Can there be a real cooperation among all those different stakeholders? And here I put on my other hat, and as a former Estonian foreign minister and coming from Estonia, I can tell you, yes, it's doable. The attacks of 2007 and what followed after that was cooperation between all stakeholders, and the cooperation still exists. It has to do with trust, but it exists. Can citizens or consumers trust the government? Yes, they can. Again, example of my country, where we're the first country in the world to have online voting. We're the first country in the world to have online cabinet working, e-government, and thousands of other online services. Can't be imposed on people. But if people trust, can make huge advantage and change to the society. And finally, on government to government. I was also worried when I read the 2 resolutions. I had the chance to work for the UN group of governmental experts on cybersecurity twice. And we did agree in 2015, that was the last time when we were able in the United Nations, us governments, agree on cyber stability principles or applicability of international law. And that's worrisome, because now the question is, which resolution, how are they going to work, what will be the sequence, many questions coming. And here I agree very much that other stakeholders have a crucial role. While governments are arguing about resolutions, while governments are arguing whether it's going to be GG or open-ending working group, now we know that both of them, but how will they work, what will be the mechanisms, what will be the procedures, the other stakeholders have a unique role. And we have to unite in influencing governments. We meaning industry, civil society, technical community, academia.
I will get to the audience for questions in a minute, so you can start thinking of questions. But Olaf, you wanted to also say a word.
Not make a mistake. This is an incredibly wicked problem. The agility by which we need to work at this moment is high. So the time to discuss very long is not there. We're talking about the tech sector, but I think that any company that is operating today traditionally is a tech sector company tomorrow. With the onset of IoT, where you find computing devices in basically every device that you have, new opportunities, new businesses will arise. but they will all be tech companies. And that means that we have to make sure that everybody knows what the vision is, that everybody understands what the basic expectations are around security, around basic hygiene. And that's why I like the Paris Call so much, because it calls for these types, it sets that vision, it sets that direction where people can act locally while thinking globally.
Maybe a word, you just said hygiene. You insisted when we discussed earlier that norms are also about practices.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on that?
So, yeah, this is something when I hear norms, I usually don't think about standards and practices. I more think about visions and views towards a future and norms of behavior. In the technical community, we usually talk about standards and practices and best practices, standards for securing IoT, standards for updates and what have you, standards that make the thing. I think the way that I talk about norms, it's norms of behavior, expectations that we have collectively of each other. And I think that creates the vision to which we need to work with the implementation of the technical standards, with the implementation when we talk about laws and regulations, and so on and so forth. So that is the way that I sort of interpret that difference. I think that in French the word norm means both standard as well as that other type of visionary.
Absolutely. So we will need to finish on time, but we still have a good 25 minutes for questions from the audience. I can't really see anyone because of the spotlight, but I was told to try to do better. Oh, thank you, that's better. To do better on parity for questions from the audience that we did on the panel. So maybe if I can see someone helping me on these. Okay.
May I ask my questions?
Well, you have a mic.
Thank you so much.
Can you just, and that's for everyone, ask a question, which means there's a question mark at the end, not make a long statement, because we want all the panelists to be able to answer and take more questions. And we'll take two, and then we'll get back to the panelists.
Of course. I will ask my questions in French. My première question...
One.
Only one?
Please.
OK, thank you. Ce qui est en jeu, ce n'est pas le cyberespace, ni... la technologie, mais c'est l'usage qu'on en fait. Or, le cyberespace a permis, on l'a vu, d'interférer dans des démocraties, mais il a permis également de favoriser la démocratie, notamment lors du printemps arabe. Donc ma question, quelle est l'entité supranationale, internationale, ou les entités nationales qui auront la possibilité de dire où est la norme, et où est-ce qu'on se situe? Est-ce qu'on est dans une interférence négative ou est-ce qu'on contribue à l'émergence de la démocratie? Désolé,
okay, so
je ne poserai pas ma deuxième question.
Merci. If you can just stay there, because I see there's a lady, but we'll go to the gentleman up, and then we'll get to the panel. So one question about democracy and...
Hi, thank you very much. Bart Shevchik at the European Commission's European Political Strategy Center. A question for Brad Smith, Minister Lejeune, and Fabrizio HOCHSCHILD. What's the best analogy that you think applies to cyberspace in terms of prior legal international law regulations? Is it more in the security realm akin to nuclear weapons, or more sort of in the standard commercial economic realm like trade and investment treaties? And so, for instance, if it's the former, do you really need states like Russia and China to be participants in this process and to sign up to certain norms? Or if it's the latter, is it sufficient that you have rules that apply to certain private actors, and because they also have to participate in the European market, they have to comply with certain norms that the European governments abide by? Thanks.
Okay. Who wants to take either of these questions? I think some people were named, but you don't. If you want to say something still, Brad Smith.
I guess I'll go first. Let me try to address each question very briefly. First, I think your point about the use of technology is fundamentally very sound. This is perhaps less about the creation of technology and more about the way it is used. And fundamentally, what we are seeing is that technology can be used as a tool or as a weapon. It's not unique in the history of technology. There have been many so-called dual-use kinds of technologies, and whenever you have this kind of dual use, what you really need to focus on are the uses that concern you, and what you need are rules that restrain or govern that kind of use. And when you think about it in that context, I think that helps point to the answer to the second question. I don't believe that there is a perfect analogy between the information technology challenges that we have today and prior eras of technology, but I definitely believe that there are strands on which we can build. Certainly there are strands from the eras of arms control, and I think it's important to recognize that there have been arms agreements over time that absolutely prohibited certain types of uses of certain types of weapons. For example, you can have explosives, but you can't use it as a landmine. And it took a public campaign around the world and leadership from certain countries to really say that is a use that we want to prohibit. And so I think that is one kind of analogy worth thinking about. I think another analogy worth thinking about does come from the realm of nuclear arms control, and specifically the role of the International Atomic Energy Commission. Because one thing that we haven't talked about that is of perhaps greater importance with respect to cyber weapons than any prior generation of weapons is the issue of accountability. Unfortunately, one of the attractions of cyber weapons to some governments is they believe that they can use them with impunity, either because there are not rules or because they will not be caught. And we need to change that, and we change it in part through the norms, and we will need to change it in part through new steps that ensure that there is not effective anonymity for the launch of these weapons. So I would point to that as an analogy. Now, I think you see in the Paris Call other aspects that impose responsibilities on technology itself, on companies. And there you do see more of an analogy towards the realm in the realm of economics. So in a sense, think about this as a graduate level course for everybody who's ever worked in the field of international diplomacy, international organizations, international treaties. We're going to have to identify the different pieces that are most applicable here and weave them together.
Fabrizio, and then Olaf.
Thank you for the excellent questions. As Brad said, there are norms. I mean, they go back. There are examples in the past that go back a long way. 1868, there was in St. Petersburg an agreement on the non-use of explosion bullets that would explode. There's been in 1959 the agreement on the peaceful use of outer space, and in 1980 there was an agreement on the laser weapons. So there are precedents. I think the other thing one has to say is this is not a norm-free space. In the group of experts that Marina participated in and that were very successful in 2012 and 2015, there was an agreement that international law applied in cyberspace. The difficulty, and that will be the challenge for the new expert groups, is to say how it applies. What does an armed attack mean in the digital sphere? If there's no loss of life, no destruction of physical infrastructure, does that constitute an armed attack as we understand it in IHL and in the UN Charter? What constitutes a weapon that causes disproportionate harm to civilians and is therefore forbidden under the Geneva Convention? How do you apply that? How do you define that in the digital era? So there's a massive task in interpreting how existing norms apply, but it would be foolish to say that it's a totally norm-free space. But we do need to see where the gaps are, how they can be addressed. And I think industry has a big role to play. I mean, industry has made many of these, as well as doing wonderful, beautiful things, has made many of these threats possible. I mean, the people who were responsible for transmitting the hate messages of Radio Mille Collines that led to the genocide in Rwanda could not wash their hands and just say, we're the technicians, we had nothing to do. They were held accountable by courts. So I think likewise, those in social media who create the platforms have to assume responsibility, as of course they're doing, I mean, to be fair. And I think the industry also has to work very hard with governments, both to see how norms apply and to address the gaps that exist.
Olaf and Minister Le Drian.
I
we'll
think
go
what
through
the wickedness of this particular issue, I think, is compared to all the previous ones, is the global nature and the open nature of this connected system at the base. I've been talking already about permissionless innovation and globally connected. Well, permissionless innovations means you can invent the internet, but it also means you can invent malware. And the fact that it's open means that everybody can connect at any side of a planet and launch an attack even when you're a kid in a basement. And I think that's the difference. It used to be the case that a lot of these technologies, bullets, mines, were the prerogative of states. I think the big change that we see now is that the offense is not only the prerogative of states, and the defense is also not only the prerogative of states. The defense for a cyber attack is in the hands of the private sector, is the people who see their networks attacked. Irony, it seems that the IGF website has been DOSed today. So, this stuff happens. I think that the biggest challenge for us is to say, we like this openness, we think that is important, we think that this global connectiveness is important, and now we have to find the measures that push back on the evil and keep the good. And I think that is an enormous challenge in a global environment, and extraterritoriality of measures is going to be extremely difficult in this case.
Thank you. Minister Le Drian.
Oui, pour revenir sur la première question qui faisait la louange de l'acquis numérique pour la démocratie, en faisant référence au printemps arabe, on peut tenir le même raisonnement de manière totalement inverse et très négatif, en rappelant que c'est bien le cyberterrorisme qui s'est développé et qui a aussi provoqué les attentats de Paris. Donc le chemin est difficile entre le renforcement considérable de la démocratie que permet Internet et les réseaux sociaux et les risques majeurs que permettent ces dispositifs quand ils sont exploités, d'où la responsabilité des plateformes sur lesquelles nous avançons beaucoup depuis la dernière Assemblée générale des Nations Unies et sur la proposition commune de la France et de la Grande-Bretagne. Deuxièmement, sur les normes, pour qu'elles soient effectivement opératoires, il faut aboutir à un accord aux Nations Unies. Fabrizio vient d'en parler, on sait le chemin difficile que cela provoque, mais on peut avoir des étapes intermédiaires et se mettre en phase au niveau européen ou dans d'autres instances internationales pour identifier ce que pourraient être des normes et contribuer au débat onusien qui ne sera pas facile et qui ne débouchera pas peut-être immédiatement. Or, il y a urgence. Et la responsabilité, elle est à mon sens partagée. Elle est partagée avec les privés pour prendre des mesures de prévention de risques. Mais il est aussi essentiel de dire que dans la cybersécurité, comme dans d'autres domaines de sécurité, il y a la responsabilité majeure de l'État, des États, pour utiliser la violence contre la violence. Et parce que si on ne respecte pas ce principe-là, alors il y aura progressivement une privatisation de la violence sur l'espace numérique, et ça serait alors tout à fait catastrophique. D'où la nécessité d'aller vite, et c'est en ce sens que l'appel de Paris se veut une contribution à l'accélération.
Marina.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to build on what Minister said on the use of ICTs. It's a very good question, and there are different approaches. I see there an ideological division. On one side, there are countries who see the benefits of the use of ICTs for society, for industry, for governance, for human rights, for education, awareness raising, everything. Yes, they come with challenges, and those challenges should be met, and those challenges and vulnerabilities should be minimized. On the other side, there are countries who see that the use of ICTs gives additional means and methods of interference into their domestic affairs, brainwashing their citizens with Western values, and so on and so on. That's true, but that shouldn't be an excuse to the limitation, to closing, balkanization of internet, or limiting the content of internet. There are other means. There are laws, there are international agreements to face terrorism, to face other abuses of international law, humanitarian law, and so on and so on and so on. But the basic idea of internet, it should stay open, free, accessible, affordable, and so on. Our commission is proud to have Vint Cerf, the creator of internet, with us. So of course when we discuss with him, when you created it together with your friends 50, 60 years ago, what was the idea? And he still says that it has to be free, open, affordable, accessible. That's the essence of internet. And we can't use excuses to balkanize or to control the content, which is not in accordance with international law principles.
Thank you. We'll go to two more questions, which have already been identified, and we really have to finish on time, so we have 10 minutes. If you can make the questions short, please.
Thank you very much, Kath Thompson. Many of your examples today dealt with at the level of government, either state-sponsored cyber attacks or government agencies as victims. I'm wondering if the Paris Call or the principles deal at all at the level of non-state actors, for example, a non-state actor attacking another non-state actor, for example, in industry, which has implications for a large swath of civil society. But I'm wondering if there is any space for intervention on behalf of governments or multilaterals or conventions on cybersecurity there.
Thank you. And the second question, you have the mic already.
Bonjour, je vais poser ma question en français, parce qu'elle s'adresse en particulier à Monsieur le Ministre. Je suis Bénédicte Jeannereau, je travaille pour Human Rights Watch. Je voulais revenir sur le sujet qui a été abordé par Monsieur HOCHSCHILD sur les robots tueurs, sur ces armes entièrement autonomes qui peuvent choisir une cible et l'attaquer sans décision ni contrôle humain. Le secrétaire général des Nations Unies a appelé ce week-end à leur interdiction au niveau international. Le président français a aussi publiquement, il y a quelques mois, exprimé une position forte en s'opposant très fortement aux robots tueurs. Or, aujourd'hui, la France a une position ambiguë. Elle ne propose qu'une déclaration politique contre les robots tueurs, ce qui est une démarche intéressante mais insuffisante. Le seul moyen de s'opposer aujourd'hui aux robots tueurs, c'est de commencer des négociations pour un traité d'interdiction. Et pour ce traité d'interdiction, la France aurait un rôle crucial à jouer. Est-ce que la France, Monsieur le Ministre, soutiendra un traité d'interdiction des armes entièrement autonomes? Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. So we have to finish on time. You all want to finish on time, so you know how much time you have left. Maybe we can begin with the question on non-state actors. Brad Smith, you want to answer that?
A couple of quick thoughts on that, because first there are, I think, clear practices around the world before the Paris Call, and the Paris Call adds an important dimension to it. I think generally most countries have adopted laws that would and should, and I think quite rightly do, prohibit non-state actors from attacking other non-state actors, using technology. And in some cases, these are new technology-oriented laws, like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, certain regulations or directives that exist here in the European Union. Interestingly enough, as a company that has a digital crimes unit that regularly, brings cases and works with governments and law enforcement, we've even found that legal doctrines that are 200 or 300 years old tend to apply here. We've used the English doctrine trespass against chattels to make clear that private individuals cannot attack others in this way. The Paris Call makes an important contribution. It has a specific provision that prohibits non-state actors from hacking back. And I think that is of great importance. We don't want to see a world where people take the law into their own hands. They resort to acts of so-called vigilantism and the like. And I think fundamentally, what the Paris Call reflects, certainly what we've long believed, is you don't want a world where any individual or company or technology or government is above the law. And so where the law does not apply already, we can build on the many norms that you've heard about, but it is, I think, quite rightly, as you've reflected as well, an area where we need to focus on non-state actors as well as state actors.
Before we go to Minister Le Drian, who was specifically a question on the second point, anyone wants to add something on that? Olaf?
Yeah, I think that I'm now reflecting at the work that we did in the Commission, where we have always looked at the behavior of state and non-state actors. And I find also in the Paris call, I find that resonating back. It's not as explicit as in the work of, say, the Commission, but it's certainly there, it resonates, and I think that is very important. We have to take... In discussing all these issues, we have to include all the stakeholders, but in addressing the issues, we also have to address all the stakeholders. So I'm completely there.
Fabrizio?
Just briefly, the 2015 Member State Expert Group that Marina was part of agreed states, and I quote, states must not use proxies to commit internationally wrongful acts and ensure their territory is not used by non-state actors to commit such acts. So the principle was established then, and that principle was adopted by the General Assembly. The problem is it's non-binding and voluntary. And the problem is, I mean, Brad Smith said the challenge is how to stop people taking the law, or states taking the law into their own hands. People tend to take the law into their own hands where they see there's a gap in the law, there's an absence of the law, or where the law may exist, but there's no accountability or redress mechanism to ensure that the law is enforced. And I think that's a little where we are today. The principles exist, the aspirations exist, but we lack the mechanisms for accountability, for redress. And I think that's where the Secretary General sees the UN not as dictating what should happen, that is not the role of the UN, but becoming a platform for multi-stakeholder discussions to look at what those mechanisms could look at. And that's what the high-level panel will be doing. And hopefully that will help the UN become that platform which the Secretary General hopes to make it to serve precisely that purpose of stopping everybody taking the law into their own hands in the absence of suitable mechanisms.
Just a two-finger addition to that, if I may. I think that issue of accountability and redress is not only occurring in the digital space. We see this in other places of internet. I think it's just a global challenge that we face.
Marina.
It's very easy to be on this panel because I agree to everything what has been said so far. But answering your question, yes, I think that this call is a very balanced document. We see reference to all the stakeholders, and I think that the fact which Manuel told us at the beginning that there were 50 states, 50 plus states, 90 plus civil society, 200 plus industry representatives shows that it has a multi-stakeholder approach, it values, and it takes into account. But the crucial word is still cooperation. We can write the documents, we can write calls and policy documents, but cooperation is crucial. I have a brochure, yeah? This one is from Estonia. It's Estonian cyber bug. This one is from the United States. It's the US cyber bug. They're similar, they're twins. So I would say that the challenges we have today in cybersecurity, they're twins. It's just how we approach, with whom we approach, and how we find the way of cooperation finally. So I really want the document not to be just a call, but a document that will encourage serious and very efficient cooperation.
Ministre Le Drian.
Sur la partie privée et les risques d'agression privée et la manière de répondre à ces agressions, ça fait partie de l'appel de Paris, puisqu'il y a 9 engagements de réflexion qui sont identifiés, que vous avez peut-être déjà eu connaissance, dont l'action contre les vols de la propriété intellectuelle, contre les secrets des affaires, contre les secrets professionnels. Tout cela fait partie du paquet, bien évidemment, et permet aussi d'identifier avec encore plus de clarté les risques qui se présentent pour un certain nombre d'entreprises en la matière. Je rajoute d'ailleurs, parce qu'on ne l'a pas dit tout à l'heure, qu'à cette heure, l'ensemble des États membres de l'Union européenne ont signé l'appel, ce qui est un élément très, très positif peut-être pour la suite. Pour le robot tueur, j'étais là, madame, lorsque le secrétaire général a fait son discours hier. Je partage son interrogation, son interpellation. Le président de la République a eu à ce propos des positions, je crois, très claires. Il faut maintenant mettre en œuvre la gravité de cette situation dans le cadre du contrôle général des armements, mais sur les fondamentaux, nous sommes en phase.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. So this is coming to an end. As a conclusion, in the introduction, I mentioned that peace efforts have always been twofold. The one on trying to suppress war, eradicate war through law and through collective action, including military action, but also sanctions and pressures, etc. And promoting rules at war, so that even if there's a war, because you can't fully eradicate war, then you still have a certain number of norms and behaviors that you abide by. Obviously, this is quite different in the cyberspace in a number of ways. We've mentioned the dissemination of the ability to use violence. We've mentioned the fragmentation of the actors. We've mentioned the risks for privatization. But we've also seen that it's not that different, that it's also about trust. It's also about institutions. It's also about norms. Obviously, the main issue is that multi-stakeholder. This is something we've repeated quite a lot. This multi-stakeholder approach. It's striking to see that all of you coming with your different perspective, all of you support the Paris call, but also think that it has the potential for being a breakthrough on an issue where we've been at a stalemate in the UN and in other forums. And of course, the Paris call is only partial. That was one of the questions. There's only a limited number of entities and countries and organizations that are supporting it. But that was always the case for these peace efforts that we've seen across centuries, that they start partially. The idea is how to build pressure on it, and as I think it has been said, you build pressure on others, and you also build pressure on yourselves so as to follow up and to implement and to abide by those rules and those ideas of collaboration or cooperation. So I want to thank you very much. I think this is obviously very fitting as a discussion for the Paris Peace Forum because of the peace issue, because of the multi-stakeholder approach. That is really what the forum is about. And I hope that next year, not only we will have move on the issue, but also we'll have a more gender-balanced panel. Thank you very much.